and where we had just started touching upon bee diseases and pests. And we spoke about the varroa mite. And just to recap on the varroa mite, chances are you're going to be encountering the varroa mite if you get into beekeeping. It's pretty rare these days to find an operator who doesn't have varroa mite. And we spoke about that quickly, and I won't go over the details, but it's an external parasite. And if you don't do anything about it, it's going to weaken your colonies to the point where they're going to have difficulty surviving over the winter. So you really have to do something about the varroa. And there's some various treatments we talked about. Some are organic and some are more produced in the labs. But there's a lot of information out there. And when I first started beekeeping, there were no varroa mites in the early 90s. And when I saw it coming, I was distressed. I thought because beekeeping was so easy back then, you didn't have to worry about anything. But once this came along and I realized that treating them with these products is not such a big deal. You know, you just have to take a few minutes to figure out how to do it. Once you do it, then it's, it's second nature. It's not a problem. I'll talk about other diseases that are far less common, but are out there. And one of the most serious
Before you
ones,
go,
yes,
before
go
you
ahead.
go on about the varroa mite, what treatment do you use?
I use the organic acids, the formic acid and oxalic acid. The organics, the formic is like what you find in ants. It comes from the word fourmi in French. There's a connection there. And you use that when the acid itself will penetrate through the cap cells into the brood. So if there's some varroa mites inside the brood while they're capped, it will still kill them there, which is very good. Whereas the oxalic doesn't. So you use the oxalic late in the fall and when there's no more capped brood. These acids will also disturb the bees to a certain extent. And some people report that it disturbs them too much and they don't want to use them. I haven't had too many problems with this. You know, I've been using them for a few years now. I've never had any serious problems. So for me, I don't know why. Perhaps my hives are better ventilated. I don't know, but I've been able to use them.
And are those like a strip? Or are both of those done like in a strip?
The Formic Pro comes like a pad, you know, so it's like the kind of material you see that's wrapped with a piece of beef in the grocery store that absorbs the humidity, something along those lines. You put it on between the over the tops of the frames inside the hive. There's a lot of material out there. You can quickly go online and say, how do you apply Formic Pro on YouTube, and you'll see very quickly how to do it. I have to say again, in this 5-hour class, I could be teaching for 500 hours, and that would be just enough to cover everything. I'm just trying to give you, kind of a sense of what's out there, the kinds of things you should mostly have to take into consideration, and then I'm expecting you'll have to do a bit of further research yourself. But these days with the computers and internet, the research is so easy to do. So I'm always around if you have questions. So American fall brood, I've never seen it, and it's pretty rare. But if you do get it, it's very, very hard to treat. It takes antibiotics. And most of the time, the only solution is to destroy the colonies. You have to report it by law.
Where's the white one?
Sorry? Okay. If you're, of course, as always in Zoom, if you don't plan on talking, it's always better to mute your microphone. So what you have here are dead brown larvae. They get stringy. They're all rotting and they smell pretty bad. The brood pattern is spotty, it's greasy looking, sunken cells, the caps not looking very nice. And it was found in 1.2% of colonies inspected in 2017. And colonies are inspected typically because, you know, people think there's something wrong with them. So if you do a standard statistically respectable survey, you probably find a lot less than 1.2%. So this is caused by bacteria specific to honeybees, highly contagious. That's why they want you to deal with it right away, because if your bees, your hives have it, they might spread it to other hives. And in most cases, will kill your colony, and it will contaminate the equipment. So even if you get rid of your bees, the equipment itself is contaminated and likely needs to be destroyed. So there's no cure, although there's antibiotics to try to control it. And one way to try to avoid this is not to buy secondhand equipment or catch wild swarms. You never know what they might have. So this is what you do most of the time. Yeah? Not fun. So there's other kinds of diseases. I'll mention them, but they're not that common or not that serious. The wax moth is a moth that will lay eggs in your comb, especially once you've stored it, you've taken it, you've extracted your honey, and your combs are sitting there in a place that's accessible to the moth. They might lay eggs, and the larvae will start eating that, and it messes things up. Not the end of the world, but it messes your operations up. Once they put this comb back on the hives, the bees will be able to clean that up. A way to deal with that is to freeze it. Sac brood, again, not found very commonly. Usually healthy colonies deal with it on their own. European foul brood, a cousin to the American foul brood, quite rare and not as severe.
Mark?
Yes?
The resolution on the slides doesn't seem very good today.
Is that right? Does everyone have the same?
Yeah, I thought.
Yeah, it's really fuzzy for me. I thought it was my computer.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Let me see if I could deal with that somehow. It says optimize. Let me try this now. How's that? Is that better?
Can't tell right now.
Can't see any. Oh, that's
There we go.
Yeah.
I tried something new. It says optimize for video. I guess I won't do that anymore.
the only
Yeah,
thing
it's
is we can
perfect.
see your whole desktop now.
Yes, I'm just going to put it on full. There you go. Is that good?
Much better.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So another recent addition arrival in terms of pests is a small hive beetle. So you see them here in this picture, these little beetles, say they're about the size of the head of a bee. And these beetles have been associated with beehives in other parts of the world, but they've made it to, thanks to globalization and the movement of things all over the place. They've made it over to North America. Now they've reached Ontario. They were first reported in southern Ontario a couple of years ago, and they're slowly making their way in other parts of the country. I anticipate they'll eventually appear in my hives as well. They're not they're not that serious. The bees can handle them, but they're a bit like the wax moth. They can start messing up your hives. You can have the larvae go into your honey supers and start eating away, and they you don't want larvae in your honey supers, of course. So there are, although I don't get into it, there are some non-chemical ways of trying to control those things. But generally speaking, the best thing to do, as always, is to have a strong hive, and they'll take care of those. They'll keep them under control. There's ways also, by learning the reproductive cycle of these little beetles, the larvae kind of drop out of the front of the hive into the ground, and they go through their pupal stages there. So if you can put something around your hives that doesn't allow for the beetles to go in there and turn into adults, then that also helps the control of the small hive beetle. So there you go. What I just said is a bit of text there to go along with that. I'm kind of going a bit quickly here because we have a lot to cover today. So those are the additional videos that I offer you. These are just a small selection of the rich collection of videos you have out there. I may have mentioned the University of Guelph videos. They have a wonderful series of about 30 or 40 different videos dealing with different issues. They're a good thing to do on a COVID night in the winter. If you're tired of watching Netflix or you read all the books in your bookshop, these are things you could look at. Here's this last one here, for instance, treating Varroa with formic acid. You could have a look at that. I think this one might be a corporate video. I don't have any shares in the company, but I thought it was well done. Finding the queen and whatnot. So I encourage you to start looking at these things. So this is how to report suspected pesticides poisoning incidents in Ontario. So you can have a look at that for those of you in Ontario. So we'll go to lesson 4 now. If you bear with me, I'll change screens. That's lesson 4. Lesson 4, are there any questions about the last few slides I showed about diseases and pests?
Just a question, when you're treating the varroa mites, do you just do it because you know they're going to be there? Do you make sure you test for them? What do you do?
Yeah. In one of the slides I very quickly showed you there were alcohol wash or icing sugar wash methods, or even the sticky board approach to trying to monitor the hive and the varroa mite infestation levels in your hive. And so you can, the technically perfect way of doing that is to monitor using these techniques to see if they're heavily or lightly infested or not. And depending on what the results are, then you'll decide to treat. Some beekeepers just assume they're going to have them and treat, they have a regular schedule of treatment. That's what I do. I have 7 hives, and I think spending all that time monitoring every hive, 7 hives, it's starting to take a lot of time. So I treat with formic sometime in late June, and then I treat again at the after I collect. When do I try to check in my diary? I keep a diary. It's important to keep a diary of what interventions you do in your hive. I think I treat again maybe at the end of August or in the middle of September with formic, and then I treat with oxalic mid-November. So I just do that on a regular basis. The larger,
Yeah, because I've been reading stuff too, and I'm thinking to myself, what's the point? You know they're going to be there.
well,
So
yeah. I mean, it does bother that. It can seriously bother your bees, right? By treating
that's
them.
what I mean. You know they're going to be there, so why test? Just do
Those
it.
are good questions, Judy. But I think you got to realize also it's a trade-off, because the bees might not be heavily infested. You know, the bees. Some genetic strains are better at keeping them under control. And if to needlessly treat them, you could be bothering them. You could actually kill the queen, you know, if you're treating them and the conditions aren't right. So it's a trade-off. You're saying, listen, I'm trading off testing all my 7 hives to see maybe there's 1, 2, or 4 that need to be treated. That's going to take me half the day. Or I just go ahead and treat, you know, and I risk bothering a hive or 2. So there's always a trade-off to think about when you're doing these things. The more hives you have, the less maybe you'll have a tendency to want to inspect every one. And I think the beekeepers probably just treat, you know, they're not going to be.
And last question on that, like, do you treat them when you've got your honey supers on?
For formic acid, you can do that. It's perfectly okay. For oxalic, by the time you're doing oxalic in November, there's no honey supers.
Okay.
But the other product I showed you in that slide, you should not be treating with honey supers on it. Formic acid and oxalic acid, they're found in nature. When you eat spinach, there's those acids are in. So
they're okay with your honey supers on.
Yeah. Okay, so lesson 4. Now, lesson 4, we're talking about we've gone over what you do during a season, your external monitoring, internal monitoring, trying to keep the hive healthy and the population vigorous, how to deal with swarms, and whatnot. So now you got all that under control. You're just looking at, hey, what do I do to make sure I have, assuming you want to do this for honey production, because some people have different objectives when they're keeping bees, but I'm assuming you want to do this for honey production. What do you do to maximize it? But also we'll look at extracting your honey. That's quite an operation. And I'll like to give you some hints on bottling and selling as well. So maximizing honey production, how to move your honey to the honey house. The honey house is what you call wherever you extract your honey. It could be your garage, it could be your kitchen, but it's kind of quaint to call it the honey house. How do you do extraction, equipment, etc., and bottling, and selling. So let's start. What factors will affect the size of your crop? Well, a lot of them are beyond your control. So like any farming operation, you know, you're subject to the gods, right? The gods will decide if things will be good or not. So weather, right? Of course, the bees, if on a rainy day, they're not flying, right? So if it happens that the massive nectar flow, all your flowers are in bloom and it rains every day of the week, like for instance, the basswood where I keep my bees, which are probably flowering for maybe 10 days from the 5th of July. If we get 10 days of rainy weather, that's it. There goes my honey crop, right? So there's a bit of luck involved. Also, it can be very, very dry. The production of nectar requires water, nice, moist soil conditions. And if you've had a prolonged drought, the flowers will produce less nectar. That's just a no-brainer, isn't it? And also, you want to say, where am I going to keep my hives? Am I going to keep them in the middle of a desert where there are absolutely 0 flowers? Or will I keep them in an area that is rich in a wide diversity of melliferous flowers? By that, I mean flowers that bees go to. There are a lot of flowers out there, but bees do not go to them. They just can't physically, with their tongue, reach into where the nectar is. So you have to make sure there's the right kind of flowers and that there's enough of flowers. And ideally, all these right kinds of flowers and in sufficient quantities are blooming, from the early spring to late fall. That would be ideal. That would guarantee you the biggest possible harvest. Around where I am, it's just wildflowers. I'm subjected to the whims of wildflower, timing. And as I've noted before, it tends to be in the middle of July where I get a good nectar flow in the end of August. I have not much going on before that in terms of volume. Now, things you can manage are, keeping your colony healthy, going over all the things we mentioned yesterday, making sure they're not swarming, they have no disease, they have enough space, you have the right populations. You don't want to have a low population when the main nectar flow is on. Another thing you can manage is providing honey supers at the right time. So you want to put them on before the population is just packed in there, right? Because what happens if the bees are all packed in the hive and there's no more room? Do you remember? Anyone?
Warm.
Exactly. That sends a signal to the hive and the queen. Hey, we got no more room here. It's time to throw a swarm and start another colony somewhere else. But if you put them on too quickly, you could do that. Put 4 or 5 supers at the beginning of the summer and leave for the whole summer and come back in the fall, and you'll probably get honey in there, but you may get less, so the honey will be distributed haphazardly 3 or 4 or 5 supers instead of well packed into 1 and 2 supers, making it a lot easier to extract that way. So, it's good to keep an eye on your hives in the summer. As I said, maybe max see them at least once a week. That way you can tell if your supers are filling up and you want to add another one up there. And I'll take the opportunity now to show you a short video on some guy who's putting another super, and just to see what it looks like. It's a 2-minute video, but I will interrupt it a couple of times just to make some comments. So this guy's somewhere in the States. You could tell by his accent, somewhere in the South. And right away, I can tell you when I see this picture, I said, I would not have put my hive there. Would anybody, I don't know, of course you haven't done any beekeeping, but anybody who hazard a guess as to the things I don't like about where this hive is located?
Well, there's a bush right beside it. You'd have to work around that. And you got a tree you're going to whack your head in.
That's exactly it. The guy's obviously finding a bit of shade for his hive. That's good, but for a hive, it's nice to be able to move around it. And this one here, as you say, there's a bush and a trunk, and it kind of makes that a bit odd.
I'm at the hive this morning to put on.
Can you hear that? I want to make sure I share the sound with you, right? Yeah, it's good. Okay. Okay, good. Okay.
On the honey supers. So I'm going to open this up first, and I'm going to see how well that second box is doing.
Now, first of all, look how his outer cover has been tilted up. He's got a stick there. He's done that to improve airflow. So it's a hot day. He's living in the south somewhere, and by improving airflow like that, it helps the hives, the bees evaporate their honey and stay cool. So
I believe it's getting pretty full just by the activity on the front of the hive. But we'll show you. I just took the lid off.
That's his inner cover.
And you can see the bees. I mean, they're just coming out of the top. I'm hoping that means that they're doing well. Let's take this top off and we'll see. Here's the top of the second box. You can see, I mean, it's full. There's bees.
No, let's get this out of here. This is obviously a brand new hive. Like the wood is perfectly clean. He's got a bit of burr comb. The bees have put a bit of comb here, but it's a perfectly clean hive. So I can see that this is not a 2-year-old hive.
It's on every frame. I probably waited too long to get honey supers on. I decided to go ahead and leave them alone. I don't have a cameraman, and I didn't have a good way to pull that frame out and hold it and get a view, so I'm just going to leave the frames alone. I went ahead and put the queen excluder on. But you can see, I mean, there's just tons of activity. And there's my hive with 2 honey supers and the feeder box.
So he's got, here you see the queen excluder, and then below is a brood chamber where you have the queen, and above are his honey supers. You can tell they're smaller than the brood box down below. These are medium-sized supers. When they're full of honey, they're less heavy. Now he's put on a feeder on top. This is a top feeder. I've got some of those, a different model, but it does the same thing. To feed them sugar water.
Box on top. I went ahead and put that back on in case I want to put water in it for the summer months.
Now he's in the south. Maybe he just gives them water. Or maybe there's not much water where he's at.
Here's the hive from the front with all the boxes put on. And you can see that I have also added took one of my chicken water.
I don't consider that hive.
That's a good idea.
Yes, he's giving them water. Obviously, he's in a place where there's not a lot of accessible water, and he's. I don't consider that hive particularly busy. When I see the entrance, I don't see that much activity.
Watering containers, cleaned it up, and put it up here for the bees to have some water right next to the hive. The wood chips are in there so they can climb out. They won't drown. I'm using my entrance reducer just to prop up the back of the lid to add more ventilation through the hive. I'm still novice, so if you are a beekeeper and you see that perhaps I need something or I have done something that maybe isn't working well, just leave me a note in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.
I thought he did a pretty good job. I have, I guess, one more comment I would say for him. Whoops. Let's just start.
So I'm going to
Look what his hive is sitting on. He's got this little, I don't know, a little hive stand here. It's sticking out on both sides. I mean, maybe it's solid, but that's, all it takes is you to accidentally bump it and it could fall over. It seemed to me he could have put this on a broader hive stand so that that risk wouldn't be there. Okay, now I'm going to go to the next slide if I can.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Why do we have to? Why did he put the feeder on the top if the bees have water on the side? Because if you want to have honey, you're not expecting to have honey from the sugar syrup.
Yes. So what he's done here, I mean, he's like I was saying, it seems that he must be in a place where there's not much accessible water for bees when they're flying around. Maybe he doesn't have any rivers, lakes.
Last time I was beekeeping with a camera, I told you guys that I would be feeding the bees in the next video. Well, this is the next video, but I'm not going to feed the bees today because over the last couple weeks, I noticed something pretty special happening.
This looks like it's coming from this here. Yeah.
That's okay. We can have that change by the end of the course.
Here we go. All right. Okay, so he's not feeding them sugar water in this case. He's feeding this water. That's what he said. So he's obviously in a place where you don't have much open water. And in our situation in this part of Canada, and probably in BC too, there's nearby accessible water. I don't know, maybe in the Okanagan Valley. Where are you, our friend from BC? We have someone from BC, and so the Okanagan can be quite dry, so you might want to be giving water. Otherwise, they might go to your neighbor's pool. They don't like that. So he's got two sources of water. Perhaps the small chicken water was there before, and as he added supers, he decided to put on a top feeder. The top feeder, as I said, you could put water in it. We don't need to do that in this part of the world, but also sugar syrup when you're feeding them, which is what I do. So you've got your, how much can you expect to be making in terms of a harvest? Well, I would say that in our part of the woods, in Ontario and Quebec, you could expect 30, 35 kilograms a hive, maybe a little bit more, maybe less. When you start off with hives that are healthy and they have a lot of drawn comb already. If you're starting with just a nuke, you'll get, I think you should still, if the summer's good, you should still get 10 or 15 kilos of honey, I would hope. Otherwise, the bees do have to spend a lot of energy making comb. So what is the secret though? I know a secret for tripling that amount. Very easy. Secret is, move to Alberta. In Alberta, the average production is like 70, 80 kilos, 90 kilos per hive, and it could, so what's that?
Look at the supers.
Exactly. That's I don't know. I saw this picture on the internet, and I don't quite understand what's going on here. Perhaps the bees fill that up in a matter of weeks. It would be very difficult to remove those supers. Try that. So I don't know if this is just a joke picture, but the message I'm communicating with this picture is that you can get a lot of honey if you're out in Alberta. As you see, you have these, it's a lot of commercial agriculture, and you have alfalfa or canola. I think this is canola. When the bees have that at the doorstep, they're not flying very far, and they're working, you know, long summer days up there. You can have they're working 16 hours a day in no time. They're bringing in a lot of honey. I'm looking at the chat box here. Yeah, I guess that was all about the resolution. So if you want to move out there, great. How do you know when to remove your honey from the hives? Well, you have to do your inspections, and you will pull out your frames, and if they look like this, first of all, you're going to thank your lucky stars. You'll say, oh my God, look at this beautiful frame of capped honey. And look at that, it's almost all capped. That's all caps for all intents and purposes. Probably the same on the other side. This is what every beekeeper dreams about in the winter months, you know, pulling these things out of their supers. You know then that your honey is ready to be extracted. And the capped honey is a reliable indicator that it's cured. Cured means that it's dry enough. The moisture content has been brought down by the bees fanning, by the circulation of warm air, and they've reduced the moisture content to below about 17%. At that point, below 17%, the honey will not ferment. If it's much above 17% and you extract it and leave it in a jar, it's going to start fermenting. Like any grape juice, you know, will ferment to make wine. Same thing will happen to honey that is not cured enough. So it's very important, if you're going to be extracting your honey, to be sure it is dry enough. The moisture content is low enough. We'll talk about that shortly. So what do you do? You have to keep on monitoring and see how these frames are coming along. So you'll be pulling some frames out, then you'll say, it's not quite full. And that's the big disappointment of beekeepers. You go to your honey yard, you check out your supers, and you go, you pull them up, they're just half covered. I'll give them another week, you know, another 5 days. And you come back 5 days later, no difference. You get frustrated, right? And this, you know, Canadian summer being what they are, you don't have all the time in the world to get them capped. So you do have to make a call. You have to make a call sometimes, like I have in the statement here. Most often a judgment call is required. You know, if they're over 80% cap, usually it's okay to extract, bring it to the honey house. If it's 50, 80%, well, you could bring it to the honey house and put it in a drying room. I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, a drying room to further the drying process. And if it's less than 50% cap, well, you know, it's up to you. You can leave it in the frames, and hope that there'll be a bit more nectar and the bees will end up capping it. But if it's the beginning of September, by then it's starting to get late. Feed them back to the bees if there's no more nectar flow. You can take it out of the hives, remove all the honey supers, and then instead of feeding them sugar water, you can feed them this honey that's just in some of the frames, or you can make mead out of it. This year I started making mead, and I've got a batch that's in a just secondary. It's just settling right now. I'll be bottling it next month probably. I'm looking forward to it. I mix my mead with wild raspberries too, so it's got a nice pink blush to it. So you've gone over and you've checked your supers, and you picked them up, and you said, hey, I've got a lot of supers here. They're mostly capped. They're ready to be extracted. I want to take them to the honey house, but you have a problem. They're full of bees. You can't just take these frames to the honey house full of bees. You have to somehow separate the bees from your frames full of honey. So, you know, you don't want them in there because it's going to be a mess. There's different ways of doing that, many different ways. I have one of these, and they're very good. It's called a Quebec bee escape. It's like a lobster trap, you know, works in the same kind of way. The bees can easily move in one direction, but have difficulties going back in the other direction. So what you're looking at here is the bottom side of the this is the action side of the bee escape. So typically, if you can understand how this would work, the bees would be on the super, the honey supers above, and you put this thing, you flip it over, of course, this is not the right direction. You flip it over so just the hole is facing into the honey super up top, and then this contraption here faces below. So at night, when it cools down, the bees will go into the brood box because they have to keep all the brood warm. In the daytime, when it's warmer, it's not so important. So at night, the bees will move through that hole and they'll find their way through this little maze here, and they'll get out and get into the brood box. The next morning, when typically the bees will move up again into the honey supers, they won't find their way back in. They can't get back through that. So you put that in one day, and then they come back the next day, and the bees typically are no longer in your honey supers. How's that? Pretty elegant, right? it does require 2 trips to your bee yard. You can't just go there one day, put it and take your honey away. You have to go one day, put these things in, these bee escapes in, come back the next day to take your honey supers away. But if your bee yard is very close to where you live, that's not a problem. Another way of doing it is just to get a brush, a bee brush in this case, and just brush them all off. The bees tend to, take that without too much of being too angry. So this person here is doing it without gloves. You can see that. So, notice they have a fence around their colonies here. I wonder what kind of critters they're trying to keep out. And this, if I just, as an aside, I'm looking at this frame. This is not a frame full of honey. This is a frame that's got brood in it. This is brood. This is capped for brood here, not honey. So the bee brush, you do it one frame at a time. It could be a bit tedious, but what it allows you to do is to inspect every frame and just take the ones that are capped enough according to you. So you can, and the ones that are not capped enough, you put them back in the honey super. And the ones that are sufficiently capped, you can put them in another box next to you, sitting in a wheelbarrow, for instance. So you fill that other box full of cap frames. And that's
Martin, could I just ask one question?
Sarah.
At where that brush is showing in the picture, that looks like honey at the one end, and then the other end looks like brood. What happens if you have both on the one frame?
Here? Oh, you shouldn't be taking
no,
the one.
The end where the brush is there.
Here. That's looks. You're right. That looks like honey there. And that is a frame coming out of the brood box. And typically, the queen lays brood in the middle here in a big circular shape, and on the edges you'll have pollen and honey.
Okay.
So in this case, this person is brushing off. This is not my picture, but the person is brushing off the bees. I don't know what they're doing. Perhaps they want to inspect more closely to see if they're eggs or something like this. But this is not the kind of frame you'll be taking to the honey house. Okay. This is a brood box frame. You'll be taking your frames out of the honey boxes, the honey supers, and you'll be swiping the bees off of those. And because you have a queen excluder, you won't have any queen nor eggs nor brood in there.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I just have one question. So when you're doing the honey supers, like, so now you've got one that's full, and then you put another one on. Could you take the one that's full and just take it off and say, oh, I feel like getting honey today?
Yes. Oh, yes. By all means. Yeah, you should. If you extract honey at different times during the summer, you'll have different kinds of honey, right? Because you have different flowers that are blooming. And I mentioned several times before, I have the basswood honey at the end of July, and then at the beginning of September, I have my goldenrod honey, and they have completely different flavors.
So usually people are leaving 3 or 4 supers on because it's just they want to do them all at one time.
Yeah, I can leave them all there, just so I can, if one gets heavy, it's full, I can take it off, put an empty one, and put the full one on top again, and so the bees will work that, and they'll add it up, and so you can do that, and it's if you just want extracting is a big mess, it's a big work, and if you want to do it just once a year instead of twice, so that's just one major cleanup instead of 2 major cleanups.
Okay.
So here I'm saying that it can be tedious to do it this way with a brush. It takes time. You can be harassing the bees a little bit, but at the end of the day, that's generally what I do. You have to be careful because as you're putting the frames aside, the bees will start discovering your frames full of honey in your wheelbarrow, right? So I put them I put a box in the wheelbarrow, I put the frames in the box, and I have a lid over that. So I open the lid, put the frame in, close the lid again. That way you have fewer bees getting into that because it kind of defeats the purpose if you take your wheelbarrow to the car and again, it's full of bees. And this allows you to choose which frames you'll be taking home. I just love this little video, and I have to show it to you because this is the University of Guelph guy who does all the videos. He's good. I really like his stuff. And here he shows you one exciting way of taking the bees out of your supers before bringing the boxes to the honey house.
That method. The last method I'm going to show you is using a bee blower.
Look at that.
And what we do with that,
no protective gear,
is take the honey off the hive.
Here goes the top, the outer cover. That's a small super there. Notice the handles they have here for moving the hives. It's very practical.
The top box wasn't very full, so I'm not going to
a lot of burr comb.
Harvest that box.
A lot of burr comb, a lot of propolis.
And then we get a leaf blower going.
Look at that. Oh, he's looking so happy.
We blow in between the bottoms of the frames, and we turn the frames like pages of a book so we can blast the bees out. Once that's done, we just haul the honey away. So we'll get this blower going and show you how that works.
Look at that. There you go.
My God, my husband's gonna love beekeeping.
You think that beekeeping is carbon neutral, but then you start bringing in these contraptions in there. Okay, now I've got problems moving on from these slides once I've shown the video. I'll see what I can do here. I don't know what it is. I got to figure this one out. Here we go. Okay, once you've got your honey supers, there's no more bees in them, and but they're full of nice frames of capped honey. You got to take them back to the honey house. You know, typically that requires some type of help. Now, if you've got a big operations, maybe one of you one day will be into this. But if you have a big operations, obviously you'll have a vehicle. And the big beekeepers, they keep their hives on pallets. They'll put 4 hives of pallet, and they have forklifts. You know, they just move around like that. That's a big operation, though. Most people I know use this kind of technology, and that's what I do. This or a wheelbarrow, take it from your bee yard to your car, something like that. All your equipment. And then you pack it in the back of your car. That's what I do. Pack it in the back of your car. Invariably, there's always a few bees that are in there too. You're driving to your honey house, and the bees flying around. But you know, they don't tend to want to sting you when you're driving.
How far away does your honey house have to be from your hives?
It can be right next door, as long as you. I'm going to address that question right here. As long as it's screened off or it's impermeable to bees. You don't want bees to be able to access the inside of your honey house, because they're going to want to with the smell of honey coming out of it. So another option is to do it all at night. You could do your extraction at night right next to the bees, because at night they don't fly, but that's a bit problematic, isn't it? We've got the honey, taking it off the hives, we're bringing it to the honey house, and look at these people. It looks like this is a beekeepers association. You see the sign there, a group of people having fun. The extraction, you got to consider it as a celebration. This is the time of year when all the hard work starts to pay off. Bring your friends along, put some music on, and it's like the vendange and for wine. You know, you picked all the grapes, now you're squishing them. It's a lot of fun. So in this case, what I see in this picture, let's just go over it here. It's important to note that no matter how hard you try, things will get sticky. It's when I have a little honey house. It's kind of like the back room in the cottage we have, and it's got a sink. You know, it's got a door directly to that place from the car. It's great. But at the end of the day, this handle to my bedroom is sticky. Don't ask me how, but somehow that honey gets everywhere. So just keep that in mind. Try to do all you can ahead of time to reduce the mess that you're going to invariably make. And if you look at these people, they got tarps on the floor, plus newspapers on top of the tarp. You know, they're getting ready. And that's where the point you asked there, make sure your space is inaccessible to bees. Otherwise, you're going to have thousands of bees in there. And every once in a while in the Facebook groups, you hear, oh my God, I left the window open and there's thousands of bees in my honey house and things like this. Once they're in there, they're hard to get out. It's not a fun thing. I don't know, whatever, like any workspace, make sure it's very bright. And one thing you should think about is a place that you can heat to quite a warm temperature. Why would you want to do that?
Honey flow.
Run.
Exactly. I got a couple good answers there. The warmer it is, the easier the honey will flow, because you're trying to get honey out of the little cells, right? And because of what's it called? What's the word there? Oh, I did study science at university, but I forget the word. The liquid will tend to stick to the surface of a material, and the honey will tend to stick inside the cells. But the warmer it is, the more easier it will leak out. So you want to do that. So it reduces the viscosity, it facilitates the flow. So these people are having fun. Hey, it's a good time. So Rule number 2, set up a logical production line. Look at this woman. She's doing a great job here. She's got, she's scraping off, she's opening up the cells, the cap cells here. She's got right next to that, she's got her extractor, and then she's, you know, it's coming out here, and so it's a straight line, right? You do that, you're not moving around so much. If you're moving around with let's say you've uncapped your frame and there's honey in there, and it's kind of liquid and it's leaking, and you have to move across the room to put it into your extractor, you're going to have a whole trail of honey there. You'll be walking in honey all afternoon. So also, it reduces the chances of misplacing your tools. Everything's at hand. Having said all this, I look at this picture and I say, "Oh, she's taking some risks. This lady." You know, I see anything you see there that you think, "Well, I wouldn't do it like that." Anybody have any ideas?
Cardboard box underneath the pan.
What's that?
The cardboard box underneath the pan where she's extruding.
Exactly. I mean, a cardboard box doesn't seem to me like the most solid kind of thing on which to have your honey flow out of. And what if you kick it by accident, or it gets too heavy and it crashes? You're right. I also think that the little chair with the jars there, I mean, you're moving around and you know, whatever, you might have a stray bee in there and you're not looking, you get frustrated, you kick the chair and all the jars go flying, they break, there goes all your honey. So, you know, make sure your system is foolproof and it's not going to cause a mess. She has a good idea of putting this pan underneath her jar in case there's an overflow. There's always a bit of an overflow because you're doing this by hand, and sometimes you're distracted and it overflows. If you do have a jar of honey that crashes and breaks and it's full of glass, well, obviously you can't do anything with that in terms of human consumption, but just scoop it all up as best you can and bring it back to the hives. Now, the bees will not take the glass, but they will take the honey and put it right back in the hive for you. Now, I talked about drying your honey. Now here we have quite a big drying room. It looks like very professionally made here. It's got some fans stuck on the ceiling, and this here looks like a big industrial dehumidifier. There are no windows. It's probably well insulated. So in your efforts to ensure that your honey is dry, you might want to use one of these. If a lot of your honey is not quite 80 or 90% capped, you might want to use one of these. You can do it a lot more simply. And what I do is I have it's like a closet, basically, just a regular closet. The utility room at my cottage is a small thing. And I stack up my supers there. I stack them up like I ship them so that they're not all one on top of the other like you see in this picture, but they're kind of like just pushed over side so air can circulate between them. I put a regular fan in there and I put a dehumidifier and I turn up the heat. So it's 30 degrees in there. I got a fan blowing and a dehumidifier, and I leave it there for a couple of days. And, you know, that helps, you know, that gives me confidence that I'm extracting a little bit more moisture from my frames.
How do we know that the moisture content is below 17%?
Oh my, I have such great questions for you, but I've anticipated the question. Let's wait for a slide or two here.
Okay.
So be careful because honey is hygroscopic. So if you just leave honey open to the air on a humid day, it's actually going to absorb the humidity. So if your honey is at 7, if you got a frame of honey that's not fully capped and you let it sit there in a humid day, instead of being 17 or 18%, if you let it sit there for a day or two, it'll go up to 19%, 20%, and it's going to be harder and harder to get it dry enough. So don't let honey sit around long outside the hive until you extract it. So here we go. This is what we're talking about in terms of monitoring the moisture. I think it's important to do that. Some beekeepers will not bother. They'll just say, oh, they're capped enough and let's just bottle it. But all it takes is one bad batch. You know, let's say you've got 2 hives, you've bottled, you got 30 or 40 jars of honey, and then you open one up a couple of weeks later, oh, you see bubbles there. Oh, I can't give that away. Oh, what am I going to do? It's terrible. So it's worth investing in one of these little simple, cheap instruments just to keep an eye on things. It's called a refractometer. They're about $30 on Amazon. That's exactly the model I have. You put a tiny little drop of honey, a very thin one. The thinner it is, the clearer the image on your reader here. And then you check the moisture content. And you probably can't see on your screen, but I see the blue line here. This is called water percent. And the blue line here it's at the 20, it looks like 20.2% level. So I don't know what they're measuring there, but that would be too moist for honey. So you would leave it back, you'd leave it into the drying room a bit longer. So take the honey directly out of the frames before you extract it, because once you've extracted your honey, it's pretty hard to dry it. Because, you know, what you need to do is have as much surface area exposed to the air, to dry air, in order to extract the moisture. But if it's already extracted, you have a whole pile of honey in a bucket. So very little of that honey is exposed to the air for moisture extraction. So leave it in your frames. Take your finger, scratch some honey out, put it on the refractometer and measure it. Do it 4 or 5 times in several different frames to try to get an idea, and before you extract.
Did you say you used a humidifier and a fan in your room?
A dehumidifier. Yes.
Sorry, dehumidifier and a fan.
Yeah, a small room, the smaller it is, and the less hard your dehumidifier has to work. If you find the readings, I really don't have to heat the room because the dehumidifier itself heats the room sufficiently. So if you find the readings are consistently below 17%, above, then yeah, put them in a drying room. If not, you can extract and bottle. So, you know, I've once gone overboard and my honey was way too dry. It was like 15%. It gets very thick, like molasses in January kind of stuff, you know. And some people like that, you know, the honey it's a very consistent honey. So you have to decap, you have to uncap your frames of honey. There's different ways of doing that, of course. And this is my secret technology. Works very well. It's very cheap. You just run it up and down your frames. Got some good music going, and you know, make sure, like I've got this big plastic tray here underneath to catch the dripping honey. It's not quite big enough, but it does the job. And you know, you scratch one side, you flip it over, scratch the other side, then you can put it right into your extractor so that if it continues to drip, it'll drip into the extractor and not on the floor. Just as an aside on this picture, you can see the brown stuff on the edge of my frame here. That's propolis there, right? Propolis, very common. So there are, of course, the industry comes along and says, but you can't use a regular cheap fork from home. You have to buy something special, you know, and spend your money on our products. And of course, you know, you can't deny the fact that if your fork is wider, it's going to go faster. Or you can go to the next step, and this guy's using an electric knife, a hot knife. You see the cable here, his knife's plugged into the wall, it's very hot. I had one of those once. Frankly, I didn't like them. Why? Because, you know, if you run your hot knife, you know, down this frame and down the other side, you're losing the heat of your knife. So you have to let the knife sit for a while to warm up again, you know? So that's something I didn't appreciate. And also, if you put your knife aside for a minute, because you have to do something else, attend to your extractor, and it's heating, the honey starts to become carbonized, you know, it starts to burn. So I thought the hot knife, I didn't quite like it, but people use it, so some people like it. Then there's the extractor. Now this is a piece of equipment that, you know, can be, even a basic one is going to cost you several $100, $400, maybe more. You can look in the used equipment to get your first one. Usually better to do that in October, November, when people said, I don't want to do beekeeping anymore, I'm selling my equipment. So that's when it's the best time to buy. Don't try to buy one in August when everyone's looking for one. This is a simple one. You can see it probably takes 4 frames. You slide them in, right? Once they're uncapped. And you take your handle and spin away. Usually the legs here, if you spin away, these things could go wobbly, right? Because the frames are rarely the same weight exactly. So they're going to go wobbly. So often you can bolt them to a floor or to a pallet to make them more stable. So what you consider when you're buying an extractor, you know, how many frames going to take. If you have one hive, you don't need a powerful extractor. Some of them just take 3 frames, the cheaper ones. If you have 20 hives and you just have one of these by hand, you're going to be working and you're going to have a sore arm after a few days. Some of them, you know, they can be electric. Mine's electric. My motors are really weird though. I think mine's like 50 years old. I might have to do something about that soon. But electric's nice. You just flip on the switch and plug it in and there it goes, right? And also, can it take large and medium frames? That's the wrong word there. I should call that a frame. Are they reversible? Mine is reversible. You put it in once and then you can flip it over without having to take it out. So, you know, it saves a bit of time. Once you've spun your honey and it's flown out of the sides of your frames, it sticks to the sides of this extractor. It drips down to the bottom. That's why, again, it's important. It's better to have a warm room because it'll drip more quickly. You have a spout, and then you open that spout and all your honey is going to come out. But it comes out full of wax cappings. It might have a bit of twigs in there and grass and the occasional bee parts. Invariably, you'll have some bee parts in there. So you have to remove all that. You need a honey filter for that. This is the kind of honey filter I have. And once again, the warmer the honey is, the more it will nicely flow through that filter. I learned something this summer, though, you know, because I would extract and pour it right through the honey filter right away. And there were a lot of wax cappings in there, and the wax cappings would quickly clog up the filter. And I'd have to remove them by hand. It was a messy, sticky job. And someone said online, said, oh, no, just when you're emptying your extractor from honey and all the wax cappings, empty it into a bucket with a spout at the bottom and wait for a few hours. And then the wax cappings float to the surface. So then you could open your spout at the bottom and filter that, because the honey down below has very few wax. So it'll flow through your filter a lot more quickly, and it gets the job done more easily. There are different ways of filtering. I also once worked with these nylon meshes that are made specifically for honey. It's got the right size opening so that the honey that comes out the other end is clear, crystal clear. That's cheaper and just as good. And so here you go. This is one of my pictures here. My extractor, which is solidly bolted to this kind of table, which is itself bolted to the wall, because these things do bounce around a lot. Going through my filter here, you can see the wax cappings that will block the filter into a bucket here down below.
You said, so you just leave it and the cappings float to the top of the honey?
Yeah, now now I don't do like this anymore. The honey that comes out of my extractor, I put it into a bucket like this right away with a spigot down below. I let it sit for a couple of hours.
Okay, so you haven't filtered it yet. Okay.
Yeah, then I filter it.
Okay.
So
how do you get this all clean afterwards? Like you have to clean that whole extractor? Like you
half of the
like a job.
Cleaning, yeah. The extractor is bolted, and I take the bolts out and I bring it outside and I hose it off.
Okay.
And I realized I was looking into my extractor last month, a month or two ago, in October, November, and I noticed even after cleaning it, I guess I cleaned in a cooler day, and I thought I rinsed out all the sticky leftover honey, but some more honey was still in there. So there's still a bit of honey in the bottom of my extractor right now. So the next time I get to use it, I'll remove the last honey and before I use it again. But yeah, cleaning is always a bit of a job. You know, it's all part of the process. So how do we extract? This is a quick review slide here. We got to make sure the moisture content is okay. We have to uncap all the frames. By the way, the cappings themselves are really nice wax. They're clean wax. They're new wax. And you know, if you have a big operation with 100 hives or whatever, you end up, you know, having a lot of wax cappings, and that's a valuable byproduct. Beeswax has always been in the history of humanity a very valuable product, and it continues to be today. People will buy your wax and pay you a good amount of money, but you know, you'll never make much money off of it unless you've got hundreds and hundreds of hives. You put the frames in the extractor, you spin. The empty frames can be returned to the supers and made available to the bees, because even though you extracted the honey, they're still wet with honey. And so instead of putting them somewhere where all the wax moths can get to them and other animals and other insects, you bring them back close to the hives, and the bees will discover them quickly, and they will clean them up and bring that leftover honey back into their hives.
Would you put them in a super and just put the super by the hive?
That's what I do. I don't put 10 frames per super. I put maybe 6 or 7, so that there's more space. And it's probably better not to put them too close to the hives. I invariably put them within 50 meters. And then I think the bees, they get pretty aggressive between each other. And probably, you know, I see them fighting. And so I got to find a better system. So you can leave them 100 meters away. Some people say leave them at least a couple hundred meters away. They'll find them, and you know, and they'll clean them, and they'll have less of a tendency to fight. All the debris that's filtered out is still sticky with honey, and that's something else you can leave out for the bees to come and clean up. And now then you need to bottle, right? Filtered honey can be kept in a closed container until you're ready to bottle, right? You can have a big container, 50 kilos or 30 kilos of honey. Keep the lid on it because you don't want it to start absorbing humidity. But be careful because some honeys will become crystallized quite quickly. So you don't want to have a 30-kilo bucket of honey that's all solid become crystallized. So it's best to bottle it pretty soon after you've extracted it. So I'll quickly go over that. We're running out of time here, but I'll do this quite quickly. And I'll be sending you this slide deck afterwards as well. So if there's anything we miss, the last few bits, not that technical. So what do you do with all your honey? You can use it straight up yourself if you like honey on your toast or whatever for cooking. You can ferment it for mead. So for about 5 or 6 kilos of honey, you can make about 20 to 24 bottles of mead. Gift it, sell it through local shops. Sell it wholesale. I sold my honey. I made like $2,500 this year selling my honey. That helps pay for my hobby. If I do it turns out to be about an hourly wage of $5, I think. But it's fun. It's good work. I like it. So there's a lot of regulations though if you're selling. If you're just selling to friends, family, at a local community market, and you're not doing it retail. All you need to do is put your name and your address and say honey on it. And that's the only rule. But if you start wanting to sell through shops, the regulations get pretty complicated. There are regulations, if you're just selling it within the same province, there's some provincial regulations. But if you want to sell it in other provinces, it gets complicated. I don't get into all the details here. I don't think we're going to be doing that just yet. Get back to me if ever you're starting to sell internationally, and then I can help you with the rules. I found some rules for labeling in Canada and Ontario, Quebec. I was looking because I know we have someone here from BC. I spent some time this afternoon looking for the BC rules, but I couldn't find any, no matter where I looked. So maybe the BC rules, they just go along with the national government, the federal government rules. I don't know. I'm sorry about that. So there are.
I have a question about, does the regulations include whether the honey is pasteurized or not, or how does that?
If you're just selling it to locally, informally, no. Okay. So, but if that's a good question. Yeah, we'll talk about pasteurization in the next slide or two here. The containers should be new and they're standard sizes, So if you're selling you just take your old mustard jars and put honey in there. You get the standard size. It's also good. You want to sell your honey. It's a quality product, and to have the standard size jars. You should have your name and address, country of origin. I'm not going to get into this detail too much because I don't expect you will be selling commercially or retaily in a commercial way right away. Once you decide to make that step, you can do the research yourself, but you have to give it a class name, a color class, and whatnot. So the farm gate is what I mean by informally. It's usually you need your name, your full address, and the words honey, miel, or comb honey, miel à rayon. That's it. You don't have to say if it's pasteurized or not. But you can add any kind of other information you want. You're free to put whatever you want. You can say ambrosia, nectar of the gods, best honey on the planet, in the history of the world, whatever it takes, whatever you feel inspired to do. So these are farm gate sales. These people are selling honey in all kinds of jars, I find that it's good to have nice looking jars if you're serious about selling, right? If you're just giving it away, that's fine. This is where, it's okay to sell honey without too much of concern. Some farmers markets, online sales, direct delivery. Now, we're running out of time here, but I'd like to tell you quickly, following the Facebook groups on honey, and always by the time the summer comes, people are extracting, you're saying, oh, how much did I sell my honey for? How much? What's the going price for honey? Well, there's no going price for honey. You get whatever you get, as much as you want for it, as much as you can is what I should say. There's the New Zealand people have this honey called Manuka honey. And they have one hell, I think, of a marketing machine behind that, because they're selling that honey at $50, $60, $100 a kilo. They sell some in the markets here, in the supermarkets here. They're cheaper. A small jar could be $15 or $20 for a small jar of this honey. Does it have any special curative properties? I'm a cynic, okay? And I'm sorry about that. We're not all cynics, but you just discard my comments here if you're not a cynic. But I think, it's probably a very good honey, but they have a very good marketing. And people will spend $15, $20 for a small jar. So it's all about presentation. You're not selling a cheap product here. You're selling a very unique product, honey, and it's something you worked hard to produce, and it comes from nature, and it's probably, you can call it organic. You can't technically call it organic unless, you know, there's a lot organic honey. I think there's only 2 people in Ontario that are certified organic for honey. It's so complicated, but you can say it's natural and whatnot. Your honey is a superior product. It's superior to the mass market honey. You know, it's that come from who knows where. You look at this, you know, liquid honey from Canada. Okay, what is that? What is that going to? It's pasteurized. Okay, what is? That's all I know, right? I say people are naturally keen on buying honey from the beekeeper. So you're a beekeeper. It's your honey. People would be happy to buy from you. You shouldn't be afraid of asking a decent price for your honey, assuming it's quality, of course. It's not fermenting. It's got dead bees in it. You know, I guess my sequencing is not perfect here. So you don't feel ashamed to command a premium price for it. I ask, my honey is $20 a kilo and $12 for half a kilo, and I have no problem selling it. I sell it all. I got an email from someone like last week saying, oh, do you have any honey left from last summer? We bought some, it's really good. Hey, it is all gone by the end of September. So come back next year. Your labeling, you know, of course, labeling takes effort. You need to have an artist on hand to do something like that. You know, the one on the left is all right. This one's mine. I'm very proud of it. I had a friend who was an artist. She did that for me. I said I wanted to have pictures of the Gatineau Hills, of the lakes and the trees and whatnot, with little bees flying around. It's a gold label, you know, and it's kind of neat. And so I think it helps if you're going to sell your honey, if you're going to tell a nice story. It's like a bottle of wine, right? You're going to look at the label. There's always a good story behind your honey. These are labels that you can buy online, you know, and just adapt them to your name or your needs, and then they'll do that. So you can say where the hives are located in the Green Valley or whatever, you know. It's true. Don't say lies. Be honest, but don't forget to tell the full story. Who are the beekeepers? You know, my husband and I, with the help of my children, or who knows what. You know, these are wildflowers, these are basswood, these are flowers of the Okanagan Valley, or who, you know, people like to know these things. And sometimes I think people go overboard though, you know, and I said I was a cynic, and here we go again. You know, raw honey is not a regulated term, whereas pasteurized is, raw is not. So technically raw tends to mean it hasn't been pasteurized, and it has not been microfiltered, but you know, I could put raw in any honey I make, and no one's going to stop me from doing it. If you just say unpasteurized, and I think that's the same thing as raw. I think the label is a bit misleading because it says unfiltered, and I think, you know, it's hard to extract the bottle honey unfiltered without having little pieces of sticks and wax in there. So who knows? I may be an excessively cynical here. Here's a nice label. It's unpasteurized. We talked about that. Pasteurization of honey, it's not about making it safe to eat. It's about keeping it from crystallizing. So honey that is not quite the 17% moisture content or below, it might pasteurize, it might ferment, but if you pasteurize that honey, it's not going to ferment. It's going to take a lot more for it to ferment because you kill the fermentation spores. So I think pasteurized honey tends to be pasteurized because it was not quite the 17% moisture content. It also slows down the natural crystallization process. So why would you not pasteurize the honey? Why would you advertise that it's unpasteurized? Because when you pasteurize your honey, it kind of kills the distinct fragrance of that particular honey from those particular flowers. It turns it into a generic Billy Bee, no name brand honey if you pasteurize it. So, you know, it's like giving your honey a lobotomy, right? You have a honey with personality. Wow, it's got this and that, and you pasteurize it, becomes bland. Okay, so keep that in mind. And I also think there's a lot of trends out there. Cold extract, you know, cold extract. Where do we see that? We see that in olive oil, right? Cold press. In olive oil, it's a big deal to cold pressing, you know. But in honey, cold extract means you're not warming it up to, pasteurized temperatures. 30 degrees is not going to affect fragrance of your honey. The pasteurization temperatures of 60 and 65 degrees will. So I think that's a bit, going out on a limb. Nothing stops you from saying cold extract. And if it becomes trendy and everybody's looking for cold extract honey, well, then put it on your labels if you haven't pasteurized it. And I think soon we're going to be seeing probably extra virgin honey. I don't know. That's the next step for marketing. Who knows? But at the end of the day, you've got a good honey. You worked hard for it. It comes from flowers. You know it's going to be tasty, and that's what it takes to sell it and get a good premium price. So I've stretched this lesson out a bit, and thank you for hanging in there. I'm looking at my phone clock here, and it says 6:06. I have some more videos to watch on your free time. I think they're all decent videos. They're never too long, I don't think. So please take the time to look at that. Our next lesson is on the 19th, and our last one on the 19th of January. We'll be looking at, basically cleaning up after your year and preparing for winter. The winter is the most dangerous time for bees, as we all know, and it's important to do all you can to give your bees the fighting chance to make it through the winter. So, as usual, this time of day, at this time of the lesson, you're free to go without insulting me. If you leave any earlier, I get insulted, of course. And then you can stick around and ask questions. I'm just going to stop the sharing so you can all see each other here. I'm going to stop the recording as well. There you go.
Thanks, Mark.
Yes. So
See you
we'll
next week.
Tuesday, yeah. Have a good weekend.